So in this version, we're just going to have a look at the difference between the two versions of Oxygen. Both websites are running WordPress 5.9. So on the left-hand side, we have the Alpha 2 version of Oxygen 4, and on the right-hand side, we're using Oxygen 3.9. So just to show you some of the differences in the layout. So here we have the repeater. So I'm going to go up one to the section. So here we are in the section, and this is the layout that you see in the new version. So on the left hand side, you'll see that it is more compact. You can see it takes up slightly less space, and on the right hand side we have the 3.9, and immediately you'll notice that at the bottom you had this add shape divider, which stands out a bit more. Here on the left hand side, not so much. And you'll also notice that the icon is a lot smaller, whereas here it was a lot bigger and easier to recognize. So that's what you're going to notice here in the left hand panel. What you're also going to notice here is this looks pretty much the same, but that the option to change your screen size or the breakpoints, instead of being in this list, is now across the top of the page here on the left hand side. The difference is that here on the left hand side there is this fly out, and you'll see that it can be quite irritating because it does cover some of the content that you might be looking for. So if you moved your mouse too quickly up to the top of the page, you wouldn't actually see, and if you didn't know it was there, you might not be able to find it for a while. So I think these flyovers need to be moved or removed so that they don't cover some of the essential icons that you might be looking for. But the icons are a lot thinner, so the font weight is a lot lighter, and that just does make it easier on the eye, not so bold. So that's what you're going to notice there. If we head over to the advanced section, you'll see that it looks pretty much the same in the older version. It's just a little bit bolder and also a little bit brighter. On the left hand side, you'll see it is a lot more subdued, and also when you hover over an item, the background changes to black, whereas here the background goes a little bit lighter. When you select an item, so let's do that, you'll see at the moment that we don't have anything selected, so there's nothing to see. So what I'm going to do now is just change the background color here. So we'll change that to red, and then over here I'm going to do the same thing. So there we've changed the background color to red, and the only difference that you'll see here between the two really then is that the background here is black, so the writing stands out. Here now the background is black and the box is gray, and there you have your color. And if you move your mouse over this blue line, you'll see it say styled via ID, which then covers the entire block that you're working on. So if you move your mouse a little bit too far to the left, you're not going to see what's in the block. So I just think maybe that's not great, because it is getting in the way of doing your work. So I'm not sure, maybe that can be moved somewhere else. Maybe that blue block indicating that styled via ID could just come out maybe to the right of this background color here. So instead of covering the work that you're working on, maybe just fill this empty space here. That way hovering over this is not actually hiding anything. You'll also see that the globe is a lot subdued, so it's kind of there but not there. When you open it up, that's what the screen will look like, and this is how it used to look. So not that much difference, except that the color scheme in the new UI goes from dark, it has dark backgrounds, and here we had a light background. So I guess not too much difference in that. If you did style with a class, so we'll enter a class here. I'll just call it a class, and we'll add the class. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the color to orange. So what you'll notice here is that it's still saying that it's styled via ID, even though I have a class selected. So that just tells me that I would need to change that and remove the ID styling. So I'm here on the ID, I'm going to remove the styling, and then the color changes, and you'll also see that this line is green, but it still covers everything if you happen to move your mouse over it. So I still think it should move here to the right of background color, and just then have the message appear here. Or instead of covering the whole block, maybe it can just appear where it's not in the way or getting in the way of your design process. So that's the big difference here. Here you wouldn't know if I add a class here. I'm going to add a class, and then we'll do the same thing. We'll also make it orange. So here you're not going to know that there is anything styling it other than what you're looking at, and you would have to know then to go to your section and then to delete. So the green indicators are nice, and maybe we don't need an explanation every time you hover over the green. Maybe there would be another way of indicating what that is. Yeah, still does tend to get in the way a bit. Right, so there you have the difference. The other differences that you'll see here now is if you make a selection here, you'll see a blue line appears, and if you hover over the blue line, because it's styled by an ID, it then covers the entire selection. So once again, it would be nice if that line was to the right of background size, and when you hovered, it opened to the right and didn't actually cover the work that you're busy with. If we have a look over here and we make a selection, it does make that blue color. And here sometimes you might think that that is a label and not actually a button. The difference between the background and the button is very slight, and sometimes not even noticeable, and it's probably going to depend on your screen resolution or your screen brightness as to how much contrast you're going to see between that black background and the background of the panel. The idea behind the darker colors is to make it less visible, so that when you're working here, you're not distracted by the colors in the panel. So making them slightly duller works. The only thing now is that this blue line is so bright that it's impossible to miss it now. So when you go to the panel, I'm kind of finding I'm being drawn to the blue line more than to the elements on the page. Whereas here, I'm not actually having my eye drawn anywhere, but I'm able to pick out the highlighted item. So that's just the comparison between those two. So let's go and have a look at another advanced item. Let's, for example, look at size and spacing. Here you'll see quite a big difference. The size and spacing, in this case, we don't have any margin, but the margin would then appear around the outside, and we can have a look at that maybe by selecting a different item. So if we look at size and spacing of this image, for example, you'll see that we used to have the padding and then the margin, and now we have the padding and then the margin around that. I actually found working with the padding and the margin like this in the older version was a lot easier. It's just I don't know, it just felt a lot easier to get to the various elements. I'm finding here moving your mouse around the outside for the margin, I know it's a small thing, not great, and also this takes up so much space, whereas the padding and margin next to each other just seem to take up less space. So for me, I preferred the old way. The new way for me is just, although it works visually and it explains how it works, I just found the version in 3.9 a bit more practical. When we look at the other area, so here, for example, you can enter the value. Once again, you get this blue line, and if you move your mouse over, it's going to cover what you're working on. Won't happen every time, but every now and then it's going to happen. So I still prefer if that blue line didn't cover everything. Maybe it could appear here next to the width. So instead of hovering over and saying styled with ID there, it could just pop out here, styled with ID. Or yeah, or even below it, but just not covering what you're actually working on. So that's the comparison then between those two panels. Let's have a look at the layout. So we'll head on back, we'll go to layout, and here you can see the little blue outline here does highlight the items that are active a lot easier than we had in the past. So that is working fine. Not much else to say here except that once again the blue line covers what you're working on, and then you have the elements, and sometimes here you might think that that's not a button. So otherwise that's pretty much the difference. Let's look at typography. So here we have the typography, and once again here you can enter your font size, and you'll see every time you enter something you're going to have that opportunity then to have this blue line cover what you're busy with. The color picker versus the color picker. So you'll see the color picker seems to be a little bit more compact, and it's now square, so you do see more color. So in the new version that is a much nicer way of doing it in comparison to the older version. I do find, however, that when you're dealing with grays, which does happen, the gray background just doesn't work because, well, as you can see, you can't see where your color ends and the background starts, and the same with the older version, you can't see where the color ends and the background starts. So maybe just a small thing, but that seems to happen no matter what color you choose for the background. Then you have your font weights. So smaller, they appear or feel a bit smaller, but could be the same size. Your alignment, once again, the blue line. Then your line height, letter spacing, and the other elements that you have. So the moment you select something, there will be a blue line, and then you deselect and it goes away. So yeah, that's how the two panels there look. So not too much difference. Then we'll have a look at borders. So the biggest difference is that the background here is the darker color, and the background in the 3.9 was the lighter color. Here once again you're going to find that when you move over something, in this case it's slightly different. The blue line is just on the left, and when it opens, of course, it covers everything. On the previous version, just the item that you selected was highlighted, the blue line just to show it's styled by an ID. In the drop down for currently editing, you'll see that's pretty much the same. The difference here is that it has a lighter background. When you move, the black shows the selection. Here was a darker background and the lighter color showing the selection. So not too much, just an inverse there of the color. Also here there's no blue line if you select the bottom, the position for the line, which is interesting. And of course then if we select a color, then you still have that blue line. So that's how that works. And let's have a look at effects. So the effects menu, you'll see here we have it's slightly darker. Here it was a lot brighter. And then here, for example, if you go into any one of these items, we'll go to opacity. And here we'll check on opacity, and immediately then you see the blue line that will cover everything. So right, so that's how that works. And then you just have the list, and again the list here. So that's fine. then we'll have a look at the we could have a look at something else, maybe the box shadow. So just the change in the colors, but everything else seems to be the same. If you make a selection, that's the difference. Right, so that's the not much to see on the box shadow. The text shadow works in a similar way, so not much difference there, just the color change. Then we have filters, and immediately here you'll see you have your blue line to cover everything, but you have your list then of the filters. So so not much difference between the two there. And then we have the transform, and we'll go here to transform and we'll add something. And then you'll see the effect, and you'll also notice here then that we still have the blue line appearing, whereas in the previous version that didn't happen. So okay, so that's the difference between those, between some of the elements. Some of them are really marginal. Most of it is affected by the indication of whether it's a class or an ID for styling. And okay, well, let's have a look now at maybe some custom CSS. So this is what we had before. So now if we say background, let's just do red. So you'll see, and then I'm just going to copy that and paste it in here. So you'll see that both have a very similar color scheme. In fact, on the new layout UI, you'll actually be able to see the block where you're editing a lot clearer than you were able to do on the previous version. And of course you can select to wrap, apply code, or collapse editor. So yeah, I don't see too much. Perhaps the new UI is a little bit nicer in the way that it does the layout. The JavaScript is the same. And then we have some attributes. So let's head over to the attributes, and you'll see here that the attribute, if we select from the data, let's just have a look at that window. So here you'll see for me on the left hand side, these headings are very white, so they're very bright, so they actually pull my eye away from the individual elements. When you hover, they are bright as well, so I would probably look at making these titles slightly grayer. Here on the right hand side, it's actually easier to read the individual items, and that's only because the titles here are very bright, and also they don't need to be in bold. They can in fact just be in a normal font size. I don't think they have to be this bold. A 500 or a 600 font weight will probably be enough, and then also not to make them so bright. If anything, make the choices slightly brighter than the headings to have them stand out more. Okay, so that's how that looks. So there we go with that. Right, so there we've had a look at some of the advanced items and how they compare. And then if we have a look at the primary areas here, you can see you've got your different items. Let's just have a look then at the repeater. So here we can select the repeater, and here as well we can head over to this breadcrumb and select the repeater. And let's have a look at the query. So let's just have a look at the query window, and let's edit the query. So you'll see this is the difference between the two, and I've got to say that I do prefer some things about both of them. The one thing that I'm finding on the new one, I'm finding it hard to identify some of the elements. On the old one, what you had is you had these areas highlighted in a slightly different way. So, and the best way to explain that is probably going to be like this. So if I was to remove the items, it's not always immediately obvious that you can type something in there. Whereas in the previous version, it just looked more inviting in terms of being able to enter information. It just was intuitive that you could click there and add it in, and here you're almost kind of looking for where to start typing. So if it was possible to make to indicate somehow, and I don't know if that's just me, but other than that, looks it does kind of work. I think the contrast here is also very strong between the dark and the background, and I do find my eye kind of being drawn to the lines between the text and between these areas, and not necessarily to the area. Here with the darker spaces, my eye was actually drawn more to those dark spaces than here to the light spaces. My eye is actually being pulled here more to the darker area. So I'm not sure if that's just me or if you find the same. So that's just how I found that to be. Other than that, all looks fine. And when you add your data, then of course that's pretty much the same as the data that we saw previously. So it's kind of a mix between the two. I like the this just feels a lot neater, but I'm finding that my eye gets pulled here to the dark. Over here my eye is pulled to the dark, but the dark is where I actually want to enter information, and I think that's why it kind of works, is because my eye is being pulled to that high contrast area, but I need to do something there. Here my eye is kind of pulled to the high contrast, but there's nothing to do there. I actually have to focus on there. So just a thought. Right, so that's how we work when it comes to the query. If we head back to the other settings on the query, you'll see that they're all pretty much similar. Only difference, of course, is the background colors in the custom. If we go to post type, so you'll see pretty similar. Just all that's changing here is the background color. So when you make your selection, that's what we're seeing. Not much difference there in the background colors, so I don't think it needs to be. And here it's a list a little bit more, so I don't know if there's a little bit more contrast needed there or not. Right, so that's pretty much just an overview then of the difference in the interface in terms of working on the various elements. Also changing your breakpoints. It's nice that they're over here, but I don't think that we need to necessarily have the fly or popovers. Here, if we wanted to select, we would do it that way. Also here, there's not, on the screen I'm working on, there isn't a massive contrast, so it's for me going to be more a visual of looking at the size here than trying to see what I've selected here, because the contrast isn't very high. If we look at the other elements here we have the structure, and you'll immediately notice here that I'm on the repeater, and over here you just have to do a second take to find where that black element is. So I still think that the this element is not highlighted enough. Could just maybe highlight it a bit more and it'll be easier to see. But because we're going from a light background to dark. Here we went from a dark background to light. So it does make it harder to identify the element. So if I chose section there, section here, immediately here I can see the section I'm on here. I need to just check to make sure which section I'm looking at. Also, especially if you click on an element here, you have to be very careful where it is in the list, whereas in 3.9 very easy to identify. So maybe just a slight color change there, resolve that issue. If we look at the history, so this is pretty harsh on the eye with the high contrast, whereas this seemed to be less on the eye. It's just a lot flatter. This seems to make kinds of patterns that aren't there, this less so. Then we can have a look. So that's the history. Then the undo has been moved to here, whereas here with the history you had the undo and the redo. So yeah, maybe just move that history to here so that you have your undo and redo and the history all grouped together. Then we have the style sheet. So in the past you'd have to go to manage and then go to style sheet. So having style sheets accessible straight away, much nicer. If you want to add a style sheet, that's a nice bold window and pretty much the same as the previous version. So easy to work with. And then if we want to select an item, you'll see not much difference in the color between those two. So that's the style sheets. Then we have the selectors. So if we go to atomic, you'll see we can move through the various selectors. And here on the right hand side, go to atomic, we can just move through those selectors. So yeah, once again here a little bit harder to see exactly what's going on. On the right hand side a little bit easier. Right, that was the selectors, and then when it's the exit time you need to obviously then click, and then you can see admin or front end. Would be nice if that was just a drop over menu. So instead of saying exit to, actually have the selection to exit to. Here we had that where, okay, it wasn't a mouse over, but if this was a mouse over, that would have been great. Then admin exit, and then here when you move over the exit button, you'll see that you then get the flyover to save your changes. So that's the save button, sorry, but you'll also see that the background changes. With each of these the background changes, but it's very subtle. So I would prefer none of these popovers, and just to be able to make the selection and just make it a little bit clearer. And here when you hovered over the save, nothing happened. You click on save and it would simply save. So if I was to close here and if I click on save, right, so that's just to give you an idea of the difference between the two interfaces and how they work and what you can expect in the new version of Oxygen. It's a slightly different interface, and I guess some will enjoy it more than others, but I just wanted to point those things out. Just another thing to let you know, if you're working on the alpha version and you're working with advanced queries, while the query does work correctly in the back end, you might notice that the output doesn't render the correct results. So for example, here we have a repeater, and in that repeater in the query we've selected that the category hoodies be output, and what you'll notice is that when you go to the front end and we refresh, you'll see that the output is not hoodies. However, the output here is a little bit more accurate, except for the first item, which happens to be a t-shirt. But here on the right hand side we have a similar behavior where we have the query, and if we look at the query, you'll see that it's also for hoodies. And of course, when we apply the query parameter, it will output hoodies except for the very first item, which is this WordPress pennant. So that's just something that I'm pretty sure will be corrected in the future version. Anyway, that's just to give you a bit of an insight into the difference between the two interfaces side by side. So I hope you found that interesting, and thank you for watching.